Hey folks, welcome to Narratives. Narratives is a podcast exploring the ways in which the world is better than in the past, the ways it is worse, and the paths towards a better, more definite vision of the future. I'm your host, Will Jarvis, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode. I hope you enjoy it. You can find show notes, transcripts, and videos at narrativespodcast.com. Katherine, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you mind giving a quick bio and some of the big ideas you're interested in?
Yeah, so I'm a writer and a culture commentator, I guess. I also host a podcast called After the Orgy with my friend Ann Manoff, who's a lawyer. And yeah, I mostly write about the cultural shifts between 2008 and 2015. So all the ways things were changing with a lens really on the internet and how the internet started impacting us in a different way than it had before.
Gotcha. I love that angle. I think it's super important. How did you first notice that, this shift was important and that, people weren't addressing it very much. People weren't talking about it or kind of writing on the subject.
Yeah. Well, so I kind of noticed it when it was happening because I've always been very online. I haven't necessarily been embedded in, every single subculture or niche, but I have been, I'm a true digital native. I've been using the internet since I was 5 or 6. At most, the oldest I was 7. So I have a memory of things shifting. But the one thing that really got me writing about this is, I noticed this cottage industry of people trying to explain wokeness emerge. It usually comes from the center or conservative circles, and it's people who basically have the argument that really I would say my parents and my parents' parents, generation would have, which is we sent you to that college and you came back corrupted. And having gone to I went to I actually had 2 college experiences. I started off at a big kind of low tier state school where they accepted 99% of people, and then I went to film school after a year or 2 of that. So I kind of saw both happen, and it felt more it wasn't professors indoctrinating the students, but rather it was students who were picking up these mimetic ideas online and then asking for changes in classrooms. So it felt there's all these people trying to work out what happened and why language has changed and why expectations around things like gender have changed, and that they pinpoint universities. And I was there's no way that does not feel right. And it's sometimes a confusing claim to stake for a couple of reasons. One, people often assume that I am maybe passing judgment on certain things that I'm not. My mission is to say, this is how I think this information spread, versus whether or not I think it's right or moral or whatever. I don't, my own opinions are totally irrelevant to the work I do. I'm more interested in how did this move so fast? And then the other thing is, when I say information spread online, I pinpoint it really to Tumblr as the vehicle of transmission. I'm not saying that Tumblr invented these ideas. I think it's quite obviously a lot of the ideas that are now, in common parlance did come from academia, but they didn't spread through academia. And it's a hair different. And that small difference is sometimes confusing for people to understand what exactly it is I'm arguing.
Okay, that's super, super interesting. And that definitely does match my experience. I went to college. I started in 2012 at UNC Chapel Hill. And that is a really interesting point, that it's actually student driven. And then there's a feedback loop between the professors and the students. And This keeps kind of accelerating. So you think Tumblr is kind of the beginning of how kind of the new campus leftism emerged?
Yeah, definitely. And that's not to say that there was never leftist groups who already had these ideas, but they were small, and they didn't just randomly get popular, right? That's sort of like the mystery everyone seems to be trying to solve. I interview a lot of people, like like hundreds of people, and it might even be eclipsing that at this point. I'm talking to people every single day, hearing about their online experiences, and like most people first interfaced with a lot of these ideas online. And I'll say this, and some pushback I'll get is like, well, what about Occupy Wall Street? What about these leftist groups that were like very visible in the 90s? And it's like, sure, of course, like, again, like, Tumblr didn't invent this stuff. That's absurd. But like, why did they stay niche until, around 2008? Why was that the moment? Was it the, economic crisis, or was it that these ideas suddenly were able to get into the hands of, instead of simply 18 and 19-year-olds, but 15 and 16-year-olds who do a much better job at driving trends than any other demographic in America?
Gotcha. So it sounds like you kind of need, these ideas were percolating, but you need some kind of distribution mechanism to get them to people. And Tumblr was kind of that avenue that worked really well.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Is there anything mechanically about Tumblr that made it, I guess, particularly? I mean, I'm trying to remember even what was around social network wise in 2008. And it's difficult for me to grok, but I guess, yeah. Was there anything special about Tumblr that made it the place, do you think?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like, Tumblr is very difficult to filter. So, or it, especially it was at first, and there was a lot of cross pollination. So what people would do is like they would hide things under the cut. So like so to hide something under the cut means like you could put like a page break. So you could put some intro text and then put something that you don't want easily visible hidden, so it won't show up on the feed. And then so people who didn't want to see the content there, you could put a content warning or a trigger warning. So, and that was really the main way you could filter things, is by having the creator hide it if they felt like it would be contentious or offensive or triggering. But otherwise, like, you could follow tags much later on. But there was, whoever you followed, that was, and whatever they reblogged, which is similar to retweeting, if people are not familiar with Tumblr, but maybe are familiar with Twitter, it would just show up on your feed. And then a lot of new genres started popping up because of this. And the really famous one is Super Hulock, which is it's a crossover, a fan-driven crossover of three really popular television shows at the time, particularly very popular on Tumblr, which Doctor Who, Supernatural, and Sherlock. And that, people have actually studied this academically and done like huge research projects where they've like interviewed, thousands of people. Like, how did this happen? And it happened because of the cross-pollination due to the UI on Tumblr. And you kind of see it happen on Twitter too. I actually published an article today, like kind of probing at the question, like, why is it that we assume incels are all right-wing? When really, like, that doesn't make sense, right? Like,
right.
Just because you're an involuntary celibate doesn't mean that you're necessarily anywhere on the right-wing spectrum. You could be a, involuntary celibate Marxist, but you never really hear that narrative. And it's for two reasons. It's one, like the very porous boundaries that happen when you have poor filtering mechanisms. And, like on Twitter, you can only really filter something through like muting and blocking, but those are not as effective as they could be. And then two, the second really important part of this is how it's reported on by the media.
Got it.
Yeah.
And how?
So
Yeah, go ahead.
oh no, I was gonna say, like, so the second piece of this story is around the same time, everything became digital and they started slashing budgets at big publications, or really all publications. And, people still wanted to be writers. It still had a lot of cultural cachet. And because there was less money to fund reporting, a couple of things happen. Like, one, you see the rise of the journalist as a personality in a way that it didn't exist before. Like, sure, there was famous journalists who became cultural icons in their own right, but it was much more rare. Like, here there was like a path, and you did it through social media, and it almost overtook the actual writing. And then the other thing that happens is, like, these people become content mills, and they need to generate a lot of content. It needs to generate a certain amount of clicks. At some publications, they would pay you more if you got a certain amount of comments, and it was really traffic driven. So you're not getting paid, and you need to create clickbait, and you only have a finite amount of time to research. So people would go on social media, specifically Tumblr and Reddit, and scrape for stories. And what's really interesting is this was actually documented, that this was happening, and that this was creating a narrative. They were imposing narrative layers on communities that had not existed, but through the amplification cycle. So let's say, like, BuzzFeed posts something, and then it gets picked up by, let's say, the Washington Post, and then it moves a next layer up, which is like CNN or MSNBC, and then it draws more attention to a community that might have been, like, really small, and it creates a new community that is divorced from the original community that had this narrative layer imposed on it. So it's kind of like a game of telephone, and there's tons of examples of this. The one that was documented in a really interesting way was homies, which are people who are kind of like fans of the Aurora, Colorado shooter. I believe it happened in 2012. And basically what happened was a news cycle invented that there was these teen girls who were, like, really into this guy. But really it was a joke that was construed as a truth. But because it was reported on, it became real. And then there's just, like, dozens of examples of this happening. Another really interesting one that I actually wrote about in college was the fandom, or the purported fandom around the Boston Marathon bombers. That was another thing that was willed into existence by journalists.
Wow, that is super interesting. I've never actually thought about it like that. I knew journalists, especially post 2008, were really driven towards, like, the I always think of, like, Gawker as the quintessential example, and reading about the Hulk Hogan thing, and Peter Thiel getting outed as well, these people, they're actually in this, like, content mill. It's actually super brutal. They're trying to produce content as fast as they can, and get clicks to just barely scrape by. It's super competitive, and I never thought that, okay, like, they're actually they have to get ideas from somewhere. Where are they sourcing the ideas? They're sourcing them from Tumblr, and that you can actually, it feeds up the chain and the discourse to the Washington Post and the New York Times, and actually mainstream publications. That's really fascinating, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it's where you kind of get, like, the dissonance between, like, oh, this isn't real, and then suddenly it is real, or, like, oh, this is misrepresented, but then like suddenly it's actually looking like maybe it wasn't. I was talking today, and I won't go into too much detail about this, because this is a place where I don't really know the history super well. But another, like, really famous example of this is the alt-right, which I was talking to someone who has done like some similar research that I do into Tumblr about newer right-wing movements, and basically their point was like it's both claims are true, that there is no alt-right, that it's an invention, and that it's it became real. And so we're constantly living in, like, these two worlds, where it's like what really happened, how it's being reported on, the people who are identifying with the reporting. And it's like it's really confusing in a way, because everyone wants to think their version of the truth is real, and everyone's version of the truth is real in a sense.
Wow. Yeah, man, that's super, super fascinating. And it seems like there's this pressure on ideas where there's this fairly efficient market of ideas, and you've got this evolutionary pressure for things that generate more attention. And so it's like that feedback cycle. So, journalists actually, they come upon something that does generate attention, like fans of the Aurora, Colorado shooting. I could definitely understand why people would, at least click on that, right? Like, what the heck's going on here? And then that memes it into existence in some way. That's very fascinating. Do you get the sense that there's something special about the internet and how it drives like just our mimetic fascinations? It can kind of supercharge how we discover who to copy in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what is so obvious about the internet, but I don't think has like fully been articulated, are like these two things. Like, one, the internet's like really global. Like, there is no like especially like the Anglophone internet is there, like one sort of ocean.
It's one thing,
right? Like there's no like UK or Australia or the United States. It's all kind of like the same geographic space. And then also like we're constantly like immersed in it, like at all times. And it's like, I think there's some sort of awareness of this, but I don't think the ramifications of this like constant immersion has really been like appreciated. I was talking to another friend about how like it's not simply that we're always sort of idly checking our phones, but like, how often is it that you go outside and you're not, the dead time between like your apartment door to the subway or your car or whatever isn't occupied with like Spotify, right? So what happens in your, or like there's so many different examples of this. So you might not like literally always be on social media, but you are literally always immersed in that world, or at least a non-trivial percentage of the population is. And it's kind of like when you learn a new language. Like, the best way to learn a foreign language is to be constantly immersed in it. You might not ever reach like perfect fluency, but you will, at some point, regardless of how old you are, you can navigate the world, and it does kind of change the way you see the world. And I think the internet's the same way. Like, it's just, it is never turned off. You're never really free from it.
That's such a good point. I noticed this weekend. I was in rural Eastern North Carolina, where I'm from. I was at a kind of community event at a gym, and no one was on their phones the entire 4 to 6 hour period. And it was just there's a much lower level of neuroticism than I feel living in a big metropole all the time, where people are bombarded. Like, people are just like so much less online than a lot of people are here. And it was a very bizarre experience. Do you think, I guess there's positive things with the internet. We have access to all this, great information, better content than we've ever had access to. But there's all these negative effects, which we really haven't, it seems like we factored in. On net, do you think it's kind of a positive thing?
Like, yes and no. I constantly waffle on this. Like, I did have a short period of time where like I kind of, it wasn't conscious, but I like took a break from the internet, and like I look back on it, and I was much, I mean, so the thing about this is like it was a brief moment in my life where like I knew my neighbors. I was like really embedded in the community, and like even if I was online a lot, like it was kind of in a different way. Like, it was more sort of, my concerns were more like tied up in my immediate environment. And I think for a lot of people that's kind of lost. And, I'm on the fence about whether or not like localism being digitized is a net positive or a net negative. And like, what I mean by that is like, like I think of like a church group or something. Like, for every church group in America, there's probably like a corresponding Facebook group. And like, a lot of the conversations or even like some of the drama probably happens in that Facebook group as opposed to in real life. Is that better? Like, does that make it more accessible, less accessible? I don't know. I mean, I think the thing is, like, if it's used as a tool, that's one thing. But if it's like abstracting you from wherever you physically are, then it's more of a problem.
Gotcha. That makes a ton of sense. Are there any, in doing all this research, are there any personal habits you've picked up? Like, are there any, do you limit like time on certain applications, or do you think it's just like, just do kind of what you want to do?
I've gotten increasingly worse. I mean, it's like that. Like I now have like even more like keen awareness of how fast these things move, and I feel compelled to always keep up because like they're not very well documented, and like everything, even unimportant things, feel important, in aggregate. And now I'm just online so much, and like sometimes I feel like I'm overdosing on it. And
Right.
I often when I'm like, man, like, can I take a break? Should I take a break? Like, and I mean, the answer is, of course, yes. I need to limit my time online and, go outside a little bit more. But it's hard. It's hard not to, especially when when you're researching this stuff and you don't really want to miss anything. And it seems to be like an infinite amount of stuff to sink your teeth into.
Absolutely. It's ongoing. It's ongoing. I'm curious. You've written a lot about relationships. Do you think has the internet changed the way we approach relationships in fundamental ways?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely has. I mean, and there's so many ways too. Like, I won't go into like the whole like Tinder conversation because I feel like it's been done to death, and other people can say it much better than I can. But like two ways that I think are really significant and maybe like less explored are, one, like you're like kind of always talking to people, like even passively, and I don't think that's healthy. Like, even if you really like care for or love a person, I think like you need that boundary of like, this is my time with you, and like this is my time to myself, and this is my time in person or with someone else. And there's all sorts of weird knock-on effects, like depending on like where that sort of like ambient always talking to someone is taking place, like if it's in the talking stages of a romantic relationship or a friend. And then the other thing is like this phenomenon of like micro rejection, which is like we've kind of eroded all of the boundaries or like signals of that someone is a close friend. And like now it's this doesn't apply to everyone, but for like a lot of people, and it's like certainly like a supported or like encouraged behavior where it's like you might share a secret with someone, and like usually if someone's sharing a secret or like some kind of intimate information, it should be a signifier that you've crossed some kind of threshold in the relationship. This person's now a close friend. Sharing the secret is meaningful. And now, I mean, it's sometimes that's true, but often it's not. And so when, to get back to the idea of like micro rejections, when someone who last week told you about a childhood trauma then ghosts you and you never hear from them again, you get whiplash, because they, in any other situation, like maybe maybe like they would have just like evaporated from your life, and it's like a very normal thing that doesn't really matter. People come and go, but because they've sort of shared this heavy info, or you have been ambiently talking to them all day, it's very confusing, because like on one hand you recognize like maybe this person wasn't a close friend, but we had all this interaction, but it was only over text. So it's like, I think it confuses people, and we don't really have a language to talk about it, because I think on some level we recognize a friendship cannot alone be made up of text, or we have some awareness that being vulnerable no longer has the emotional weight that it used to, but there's still something to like constantly cycling through people in this way.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but it does seem, yeah, yeah, I really like that point. It's difficult to demarcate these things now, especially when the lines are so blurry between everything.
Yeah, and I think it's, I mean, I think it's especially tough for like younger people too, who like might, I think like there's a certain age bracket, and I think it might be the age bracket that we're both in, where like it's very possible that like our friends, our real life friends are our friends, and like it's a very normal traditional route. But I think for like, you know, Gen Z, it's like, you know, it's a little bit blurrier, it's a little bit more amorphous.
Right. That's a very interesting point, because kind of like you know, I did have a childhood where there was no internet, and then, you know, the internet came along, and that was kind of like that was a very new thing, and people were getting used to it. And the internet was a very weird thing, which I feel like now it's become a lot more normalized in some sense. Like, you know, everyone uses it all the time, but it was kind of when it was a new thing, it felt different.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you know, moving onto like the platforms, like, you know, social media, um, changed the internet in a big way.
Definitely, I think you're absolutely right, especially, you know, algorithms kind of ruling our life and showing us what we should see and things like that. It's quite interesting. um what's your feeling on why, you know, so the internet, I always think of this example, you know, growing up in a small rural town, if I was gay, it would be very difficult for me to find a peer group. But with the internet, I could find people that were like me and kind of exit, so to speak, while I was, you know, growing up, and I could, in some sense, have a community. Um, it's odd to me that people, I get the sense that people are really, they feel really atomized and isolated, despite that they can find like a super unique peer group on the internet that they couldn't find in person, because there just aren't that many people. Um, what's your sense of why that is? And do you think people are more isolated than they used to be? Or is that just some kind of like a bias I have?
I mean, yes and no. I think what's confusing is it's like not true for everyone. But it is true for a lot of people. And it's also like it's one of these things that is true, but also like is also a like trendy talking point, right? So it's like it's hard to know like what's the gravity of this problem. I think I mean, I don't think it's the internet's fault. I think there's a lot of things going on with like atomization. I mean, one really important thing is like I'll compare my life with my younger sisters. I have, you know, I have two little sisters, and they stayed in our hometown, and you know, because they have careers where they could you know, they could pursue work where we grew up, which I couldn't personally, so I had to move, and they're very grounded in a familiar community, in many different, you know, across many different verticals. So they have their school friends, they have their college friends, they have friends from our religious community, they have friends from our cultural community, which, you know, sometimes overlaps with the religion, from our neighborhood. You know, we lived on the same street basically our whole lives, and there's like a real sense of place. So like they never, like they're not alone in the same way I'm alone. You know, I've lived in, I'm just off the top of my head, I think I've lived in like at least 6 different cities since I left my hometown. So I think like that's a very common trajectory for people, and it's not just like, oh, like the coastal upper middle class person moving away for college, but also a lot of people, you know, have to just move to whatever city they can find work. And I think it's like exceptionally rare to be in like my sister's case, where like they both have careers that they could pursue in like, you know, a small town in Florida that like isn't, you know, doesn't necessarily have like any kind, you know, like a booming, like a
Right.
booming professional scene.
Gosh, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And just not even having that real opportunity to go back, because, you know, if there's no way to pay the bills, this is a very practical kind of consideration. Um, that's super interesting. Well, Katherine, you know, what's next for you? Like, what do you want to look into next, and what do you find exciting today and really compelling?
You know, I really enjoyed learning about like internet history and interviewing people. I love sort of connecting these dots and seeing like, you know, why haven't we recorded this? or if we have, where have we gotten it wrong? Where have we gotten it right is also like an important question to answer. And like, and meeting all these people who, are willing to talk to me and like share their experiences with me. I'm continuing to work on like very long form writing about like Tumblr specifically. And then after that, when I exhaust that, God, who knows what's next?
That's great. I really like that. Well, Katherine, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find your work? Where should we send them?
They could find me at default_friend on Twitter. And there I post all of my writing like hundreds of times a day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Narratives.